A businessman from Queens had been saving for years to get something he'd been dreaming of since childhood, a particular wristwatch, which cost just over $20,000. However, mere days after getting his hands on the pricey accessory, he noticed a small defect on the edge of the watch case. It was a small metal nub, an imperfection that he could have sworn wasn't there when he first bought it. After all, he paid 20 grand for the thing. Surely he'd notice if something was wrong with it when he first picked it up. He brought the watch to the official service center out on 5th Avenue that Friday evening. They'd check the watch out and have it back to him by Monday, good as new. You don't buy a watch like this if you expect anything less than the very best. The businessman's watch was stored in a secure vault with several hundred others as it awaited repair from a highly trained technician. What happened next would be considered unbelievable if it hadn't all been caught on the security camera. The first watch began to mutate over the next 18 hours. It shattered into a twisted mass of glass and metal cogs, its hands shooting out in every direction, as 4 legs and a metal eye grew out of the resulting mass. This spider-like creature then skittered across every single other watch in the storage vault, and within another 18 hours, they mutated too, until the room was positively alive with tiny metal creatures. Meanwhile, over at Site 19, a guard began to notice that his standard-issue Foundation handgun was unusually uncomfortable to hold. Perhaps he was developing a nerve issue or carpal tunnel syndrome. It's not that uncommon in the profession. But no, it was actually the strange metal nub forming on his pistol's grip. He had no idea that, inside the gun, a bizarre transformation was beginning to take place. And within 3 days of the nub first appearing on the handgun, it underwent a remarkable metamorphosis. Much like the watches, the gun mutated, growing 4 legs and an eye, and began running through Site 19, causing chaos. The gun began firing with reckless abandon, sending bullets ricocheting off the walls and injuring Dr. Jack Bright and Dr. Sophia Light as they attempted to disable the rogue pistol. It was able to fire in a sustained fashion for over a solid minute before stopping to synthesize new bullets through unknown means. Eventually, the weapon was captured and subsequently destroyed for presenting an active danger to SCP Foundation personnel. Meanwhile, in an insurance provider's office building out in South Dakota, one of the many desk drones working their fingers to the bone typing up insurance claims barely noticed a small plastic nub forming on the side of their wireless keyboard. It remained this way for a relatively uneventful 6 days, before finally undergoing a complete transformation. It became a chaotic configuration of legs and keys, spelling out the words, "Ask, we will answer," on the top of its body. It wandered around the office, seemingly brushing up against as many other pieces of technology as it could. The astonished workers found that if you typed any complete sentence onto this mechanical creature's keys, it would be rendered inactive for around an hour, much to the relief of everyone who was there at the time. In New Mexico, a small child was about to be scarred for life when his brand new talking action figure developed a plastic nub on the nape of its neck. The child didn't really pay any mind to it. However, within 10 days of the nub's appearance, the toy took on a transformation that was impossible to ignore. The toy burst open, its head growing 4 legs and skittering away from its own broken body. When the little boy saw this, he called for his mother. When it began skittering towards him at surprising speed, he screamed and fled. The head, which had also somehow lost its eyes to an even more frightening effect, kept repeating, "Mom, there's something wrong with my toy," in the little boy's voice. If it wasn't for the Foundation amnestics that he and his mother would later receive, he likely would have been scarred for life by the anomalous experience. In Idaho, an old woman who lived alone noticed something strange going on with her television set. A lump of warped, bulbous plastic had started forming on the top. She decided to call a TV repairman, or perhaps her son, who didn't call her nearly enough, to come over and take a look at it. But as things often do in life, she let it slip her mind, and 2 weeks passed without her addressing it. This would prove to be a mistake. Not that any TV repairman really could have done anything to help. The TV sprouted 4 long spider-like legs and a single eye. The screen perpetually showed shaky footage of an unmoving figure suspended midair in the middle of a blank, featureless room. This change from the usual programming disturbed the old woman greatly, even more so as the television began advancing towards her. Meanwhile, soldiers operating a tank stationed in Syria noticed a small metal welt on its chassis. Of course, given the natural wear and tear experienced by tanks on an active battlefield, none of them paid much mind to such a tiny defect. It continued like this for a month and a half, until tragedy finally struck in the most unexpected fashion. Much like the handgun over in Site 19, the tank grew legs and started firing in every direction, devastating nearby infrastructure and killing scores of people around it. It seemed not to discriminate or even really to aim. It fired in all directions with soldiers and civilians alike, and it took several groups of soldiers armed with anti-tank weaponry to finally put it down. No explanation was ever given for what happened that day. Most people just assumed that it was a tank operator who'd snapped under the intense pressures of war and gone berserk, but the truth would forever elude them. So what is the truth? Why has all this machinery, from innocent to disastrous, been taking on a mind of its own and causing chaos across the globe? Allow me to explain. These are just a few entries from the filing cabinet of incident reports belonging to SCP-658, a parasitic mechanical entity that's also known as the Botflies. SCP-658 instances are a unique species of highly reproductive anomalous creatures characterized by their 4 long, thin legs on the underside of their bodies and their single large mechanical eye somewhere on the upper body. They reproduce through contact with any man-made mechanical objects, though the exact means of parasitic infection are unclear. Simply making contact seems to be enough to turn an object into a breeding pod for a growing SCP-658 embryo, and gestation time is dependent on the size and complexity of the infected object. The embryo will present itself as a metal or plastic nub on the surface of the object, appearing to the untrained eye like some kind of minor production defect. This keeps the embryo safe as it develops, growing and absorbing the surrounding technology into its own biomechanical makeup. Incidentally, the name botfly is a play on an equally unpleasant, non-anomalous parasitic insect, Latin name Ostridae, which implant their eggs into the living flesh of their victims, where they incubate, grow, and eventually burst out from the skin. The similarities in breeding patterns of non-anomalous botflies and SCP-658 are self-evident. These entities vary massively in size, from the diminutive stature of 5 millimeters squared to hundreds of meters. The size of an SCP-658 instance, much like its aforementioned gestation period, depends entirely on its host object. And Foundation research has indicated that any complex man-made mechanical object is susceptible to parasitic infection. From cell phones to jumbo jets, all technology is on the table for 658. And as indicated through the eyewitness accounts in the case files, the appearance of the individual SCP-658 instances are reflective of whatever technology incubated them. This influence of the host technology also appears to extend to SCP-658 behavior, with more benign objects like phones or wristwatches becoming equally benign creatures, and weapons such as firearms or combat-ready vehicles taking on a more aggressive nature. Given that the U.S. military alone has thousands of vehicles and even more firearms, there are naturally some concerns about what would happen if ever an SCP-658 outbreak got out of control at a military base. Thanks to the extreme proliferation of and dependence on technology in our modern era, a large-scale containment breach of SCP-658 could lead to a catastrophic exponential population boom. The SCP Foundation is keeping an extremely close eye on any signs of SCP-658 activity, especially in technologically advanced cities and other densely populated locations. Research has proven that these creatures are capable of manifesting adaptations that increase their reproductive ability even further. For example, during one test, it was proven that one SCP-658 instance was capable of impregnating another. The result was it transforming into a creature with 8 legs and 2 eyes that was capable of impregnating any objects they touched with 2 embryos, rather than the typical single embryo. While senior researchers deemed it unwise to see exactly how far these 658 interbreeding experiments could go, it stands to reason that it could also be subjected to an exponential increase. One hypermutated 658 instance could be capable of mass impregnating larger pieces of technology with hundreds, if not thousands, of embryos. You can see how these often tiny and seemingly harmless creatures could quickly become a big problem for all of us. Picture every vehicle: cars, trucks, motorcycles, scooters, ATVs, vans, Humvees, tanks, planes, helicopters, speedboats, yachts, cruise ships, battleships, all becoming hypermutated SCP-658 instances. Then add every phone, every laptop, every computer, every tablet, every TV, every printer, every kitchen appliance, every gun, all being infected with SCP-658 embryos and joining the horde. Given how much all of us, including the SCP Foundation, rely on this technology and so much more in our work and daily lives, it's clear how the uncontrolled proliferation of SCP-658 would completely alter the world as we know it. It's a clear reminder of the importance of the SCP Foundation's work. The worst-case scenarios for even some of the more innocent-seeming SCPs can be startlingly bleak. Due to the mechanical nature of these anomalies, all connections to the Church of the Broken God and their illicit activities are being explored by Foundation field personnel. Containment protocols on SCP-658 are extremely clear. Any instance of SCP-658 no larger than 50 centimeters across any axis, considered to be a small SCP-658 sample, is to be stored alone in a steel box when not being used in active testing. Special containment procedures specify that the box must be kept closed through low-tech means, and we mean a true return to basics here. String or duct tape are the preferred methods of keeping them under lock and key, or, as some researchers prefer, weighing down the lid with heavy books. Anything with a more complex locking mechanism is capable of being impregnated by SCP-658, completely negating containment. Any 658 samples larger than 50 centimeters are to be destroyed as soon as possible after being apprehended by Foundation personnel. This destroy on-site order is also applicable for any technology infected by SCP-658 outside of intentional testing scenarios. In order to avoid population growth during containment, all captured SCP-658 samples must be kept at least 3 meters away from any man-made technology capable of sustaining an SCP-658 embryo. If unsure of whether an object is applicable, researchers and guards are told to err on the side of caution when it comes to this anomaly, which has been classified as Euclid. After all, when it comes to SCP-658, or really any SCPs, it's far better to be safe than sorry. Now go and watch another entry from the files of DrBob, like SCP-799, the Carnivorous Blanket, for another SCP with a rather unique breeding method. And make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss a single anomaly as we delve further and further into the SCP Foundation's classified archives.